he claimed that he had a slight miscalculation of 1 year because of a fluke in the Gregorian calendar. Jesus was actually going to return during Rosh Hashanah 1989. A new book is released. It was retitled The Final Shout, Rapture Report 1989. The time is short, he said. Everything points to it. Needless to say, folks, here we are 20 years later. The rapture has not occurred. But I tell you what has occurred, rapture apathy. Now let me tell you again, folks, I'm not making fun of these people. I'm going to tell you something. What they did is absolutely biblically wrong. Now, let me tell you, much of this teaching is due to this book. Hal Lindsey wrote a book many, many years ago called The Late Great Planet Earth. In this book, Hal Lindsey came to the deduction that a generation's 40 years. Here's what he says. And by the way, this book has sold 30 million copies. Probably one of the best-selling single copies of a prophecy book of all time. You say the name Hal Lindsey, and I think everybody knows who I'm talking about. Quote, a generation in the Bible is something like 40 years. If this is a correct deduction, then within 40 years or so of 1948, all these things could take place. Many scholars who have studied the Bible all their lives believe that this is so. Okay? Millions and millions of Christians read that. Not only that, but all the people who read it told everybody else about it and came to the conclusion that Jesus was going to come 40 years after Israel became a nation in 1948, because that generation is not going to pass it, all is fulfilled. However, it's interesting, one of his good friends, Pastor Chuck Smith, who is the pastor of the Calvary Chapel in Costa Mesa, California. Anybody ever heard of the Jesus movement or Maranatha music or anything? Understands who I'm talking about. This guy's big time and a sweet man of God. In 1978, he wrote this book called End Times. On the jacket itself, Smith is called, quote, a well-known Bible scholar and a prophecy teacher. In the book, he says, quote, since a generation of judgment is 40 years and the tribulation lasts 7 years, I believe the Lord could come back for His church any time before the tribulation starts, which would mean any time before 1981. Of course, the deduction you see is that there. 1948 plus 40 minus 7 is 1981. However, if it is possible that Jesus is dating the beginning of the generation from 1967, when Jerusalem again was under Israeli control for the first time since 587 BC. We don't know for sure which year actually marks the beginning of the last generation. Of course, if it was 1967, you take 67, add 40 years for the generation, you take 7 off of that, you got the year 2000. Oh, another interesting date. Okay? Well, let me tell you something. Let's do a little bit of Bible investigation. Who told you 40 years is a generation? I'm going to tell you what the Lord said. In Genesis chapter 15, He's talking to Abraham. And He said to Abram, this is before he actually was called Abraham, know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them. Does anybody know what land that might be? Egypt, thank you. They shall afflict them, how many years does it say? 400 years. And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge. And afterwards shall they come out with great substance. How many know that when God predicts something, it happens? That's what happened. Next verse. And thou shalt go to thy fathers in peace. Thou shalt be buried in a good old age. But in the, watch this now, 4th generation, they shall come hither again. Let me ask you a question. We just heard a minute ago, the Lord said it would be 400 years, and now He's classifying it as the 4th generation, which is very obviously much longer than 40 years. Technically speaking, if you're going to use that 1948 as your date, you got to understand 100 years after 1948 is a biblical generation. Now, stick with me. Chuck Smith wrote another book in 78 called The Future Survival. Let me say something real quickly so nobody misunderstand me. I love Chuck Smith. I think he's a great man of God. I think he's totally wrong. And he needs to be rebuked for what he did. Because a lot of Christians and a lot of unbelievers look at this and lost hope. Listen to what he says. I'm now quoting from the book. This is actually a photocopy from the book. From my understanding of biblical prophecies, I'm convinced that the Lord is coming for His church before the end of 1981. Let me ask you a question. If you're pastoring a church of 35,000 people, your name is known around the world, you're on radio all the time, and you are known, respected, and loved and admired, do you think that that might be an improper thing to say? I could be wrong, but it is my deep conviction in my heart, and all my plans are predicted upon that belief. Now listen to his reasoning here about this. In 1986, Halley's Comet is coming again. Jesus said that prior to His returning glory, that His church, there'd be signs in the heavens. Halley's Comet could be one of those signs in the heavens. The U.S. government has ordered a special study of the comet's orbit because this time it will make a closer approach to the Earth than any previous time. The experts, now imagine in 1978 you're hearing this. It's 3 years down the road, actually 6 years. My addition has just failed me. How many? 8 years? Yes, 78 to 86 is 8 years. Am I right? I went to secular school. You have to forgive me. Okay. The U.S. government has ordered a special study of the comet because this time it made a closer approach to the Earth than any previous time. The experts are studying the orbit to determine how close the comet will come to us. They don't expect a collision, but they fear that all this garbage in the tail of Halley's Comet, which stretches out 1 million miles, will give the Earth an incredible meteor shower. The possibility of debris from Halley's Comet pelting the Earth in 1986 is a major concern because it could be, now listen to this, it could be enough to drastically affect the balance of the Earth's ozone blanket. As a result, the sun's ultraviolet rays could scorch the people on the Earth. Are you hearing what he's saying here from Revelation? The Lord said that towards the end of the tribulation period, the sun would scorch men who dwell on the face of the earth, Revelation 16. The year 1986 would fit just about right. Why? Because if Jesus is going to come in 1981, 5 years into the future, 1981, into the Great Tribulation, why, that fits perfectly. How many know, looking back now, he was dead wrong? But Hal Lindsey came out with his book called The 80s Countdown to Armageddon. The decade of the 80s could be very well the last decade of history as we know it. He further states in the book that by the year 2000, there will be not enough food on the earth to keep people alive. And by the way, what year is this? What year is this? 2009, okay. The alignment of the planets will cause weather pattern shifts. Communism in the USSR will overtake America's dominance in the world stage. This will all take place in the 80s. Now please, I told you you was going to get mad at me, didn't I? I told you somebody's going to get mad at me. Don't get mad at me. Hear me out. Like so many prophecy teachers, do you love Hal Lindsey? I love Hal Lindsey. He's dead wrong. Okay? You can be right in your heart and wrong in your head. Right? Like many Bible prophecies, you know what I'm trying to do? I'm trying to bring some credibility back to this awesome teaching. Folks, this is wrong. Okay? Hal Lindsey relies on the events of the days to prove that we're living in the last days. Such was the case of the prediction events of 1982 during the Jupiter effect. Now, I know I'm talking to people who can't remember 1982, but I can. Okay? I remember preaching a revival in southern Illinois, and everybody's going freaking out because the planets are going to align. Oh, it's the first time this ever happened, huh? What we can expect in 1982, this is a quote from his book. What we can expect in 1982 is the largest outbreak of killer quakes ever seen in the history of the planet Earth, along with radical changes in climate. Well, let me tell you something. This is a classic example, and pay close attention to what I'm about to say here. This is a classic example of why we should be careful about trying to make everything fit into the events of Bible prophecy.